Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Parts of Britain are becoming worryingly. It is a landmark legal case that will decide who will start the Brexit process. Should it be ministers on their own, or do they need Parliament's consent first? The argument has gone to the Supreme Court, where judges made it clear that this is not a political decision about whether Britain pulls out of the EU or not. That was settled at the referendum. Instead, they have to choose between the government, which argues that it already has enough powers, and opponents who want MPs to have a say. Here's our home editor, Mark Easton, on a legal standoff at the heart of the government's Brexit plans.
Guardians of our constitution or enemies of the people?
We've had enough of being told what we can think, what we can do, what we can say.
The 11 most senior judges in the United Kingdom solemnly took their places in the Supreme Court this morning to consider a case that all agree is of profound constitutional importance and which has inspired strong feelings.
Gina, over here!
Morning, Gina.
The case was brought by investment manager Gina Miller, who arrived today flanked by security, having received death threats. Before any legal argument was heard, the court president, Lord Neuberger, ordered her address and personal details of others involved be protected.
Threatening and abusing people because they are exercising their fundamental right to go to court undermines the rule of law.
Outside, Remainers and Brexiteers argued over whether the judges were truly impartial.
The policy contract had to be implemented, and that was to leave or to stay.
Inside, Lord Neuberger said both sides in the case accepted the court was concerned only with the law.
This appeal is concerned with legal issues, and as judges, our duty is to consider those issues impartially and to decide the case according to the law. That is what we will do.
The case hinges on who has the final say on invoking Article 50, the UK's official application to leave the European Union. The Attorney General, Jeremy Wright, argued the referendum means power now rests with the Prime Minister.
The referendum was conducted, we say, in the universal expectation, including in Parliament, that the government would implement its result.
Set out in Westminster today is the power triangle that defines this nation's governance. Lawmakers in the Houses of Parliament, government ministers led by the Prime Minister in 10 Downing Street, and the judges in the Supreme Court. Today was Number 10's chance to argue that the referendum gives the Prime Minister the power to leave the EU without parliamentary approval. The right of the government to make or break international treaties, it argues, is a pillar of the modern British Constitution. But other legal and constitutional experts contend that only MPs and peers here in Parliament have the power to change the law of the land. And in scrapping the Act of Parliament that took us into the EU, that's precisely what the government wants to do. It is for the Supreme Court to decide who is right. This is not about whether we leave or remain in the EU. What is at stake is where, on this most vexed of political issues, power ultimately lies.
So there's therefore, we submit, a considered decision by Parliament to leave withdrawal to the government in the usual exercise.
Well, what was the origin of this? Is there some sort of paper behind all this?
The arguments put by the government's team quickly became bound up in legalese, but it was clear to even the casual observer that the justices were not going to just sit and listen.
Yeah.
Well, you've told us that it was all carefully considered, so presumably you've got evidence for that.
Well, my lord, my lady, we'll check overnight to make sure you have the white or the green papers, whatever there was.
Immigrants are here to stay!
With passions running high, today all three branches of the UK government, judiciary, executive and legislature, found themselves under intense scrutiny.
Parliament, it's been proved, do not always listen to the will of the people.
They're elected politicians though, aren't they?
I know, but do tell me they don't listen to the people. You know that as well as I do. When do they ever listen? The politicians don't listen.
Are you Remainers?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Are you Ramonas?
Yeah.
We are.
We don't care whether Remainers, but we think the law should be upheld by an independent judiciary.
Thank you very much indeed. Court's now adjourned.
Legal argument will take 4 days. A decision will take several weeks. The consequences may last for generations. Mark Easton, BBC News, the Supreme Court.
Well, let's talk to our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg, who's at the Supreme Court for us tonight. Laura, Brexit is proving to be enough of a headache for the government. I suppose this court case is the last thing they wanted or needed.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, George. But it's really a case of it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. And this case coming here today has caused a right old rumpus, as you might be able to hear from some of the straggle of protesters who are still here even a couple of hours after the legal arguments are over. Remember, the judges sitting here, 10 men and 1 woman, do not have the power to try to stop us leaving the European Union, even if they wanted to. The country has voted, we've made our decision. What they do have the power to do is to try to force Theresa May to go about it in a different way than she currently plans. Remember, she would dearly love to get on with this with leaders from around the rest of the European Union without having to consult MPs, without having to get this to go through the House of Lords. She wants to get on with it before there are any rows in Parliament. If the government loses this appeal here at the Supreme Court, though, she'll have to have this conversation in the Commons. She'll have to try to get some of her plans through the House of Lords before she can even get to the negotiating table to try to get those 27 other European leaders on side. It is the last thing that Theresa May wants. And remember that so many MPs opposed us leaving the European Union. Most of them are Remainers, unlike the majority of the country. And they won't try to block the fact that we've decided on Brexit, but some of them may do a lot to try to delay and disrupt the Prime Minister's plans on the biggest job she has. This is vital to the government.
All right, Laura, thank you and well done.
Never before have 11 judges squeezed themselves into Court 1 of the Supreme Court, but then never before has there been a legal challenge like this. At stake, who has the right to take the UK out of the EU? The government or Parliament?
Opening the government's case, the Attorney-General said the Prime Minister was perfectly entitled to use what's known as the royal prerogative to start Brexit without putting it to MPs first. He said the people had spoken and that Parliament had already agreed to allow ministers to enforce the result. Here's our political editor, Robert Peston, on the landmark case.
A heavy mist over the constitutional question of our age. Have we, the people, already decided that the UK is leaving the European Union? Or does this place, Parliament, have the final say? If in doubt, ask a judge. In fact, ask the country's top judges, the Supreme Court, in all their finery. Seen by some as impartial pillars of our democracy, by others, especially the press, as the enemy.
I appear on behalf of the...
So, does the government see them as part of a conspiracy to keep us in the EU?
The Registrar has asked all the parties involved in these proceedings whether they wish to ask any of the justices to stand down. All parties to the appeal have stated that they have no objection to any of us sitting on this appeal.
This is the wealthy individual, Gina Miller, who won a ruling in the High Court that MPs and Lords must give prior approval before Theresa May notifies the EU that we are formally leaving. She's had death threats from passionate Brexiteers.
Various individuals have received threats of serious violence and unpleasant abuse in emails and other electronic communications. Threatening and abusing people because they are exercising their fundamental right to go to court undermines the rule of law.
Now, the heart of the argument is about how when we joined what was then the Common Market in 1972, both the Prime Minister and MPs were involved.
One of the arguments that you will have to deal with is if our accession was the result of joint effort, should our departure not equally be so?
Outside the Supreme Court, passions are running high. The judges inside did their best to appear calm and neutral, although they did put Theresa May's barrister on the spot over his claim that she has the personal power, the executive power, to take us out of the European Union without the approval of MPs.
One of the reasons that many of those people voted to leave was for the supremacy of that place over there, Parliament. And when people come to this place, the Supreme Court, to argue precisely in favour of the sovereignty of Parliament, they have abuse and misinformation hurled at them.
I hope that 11 judges sit there and recognise the territory that they're sitting in right now, which is constitutionally very grave indeed. And I hope that they reflect on the fact that, this is not their business.
It'll be January before we know whether the judges will give the MPs and Lords here the power to mess with Theresa May's plans, whether they want it or not. Robert Peston, ITV News.
And Brexit is set to be one of the main issues among voters at this Thursday's by-election in the Sleaford and North Hykeham constituency in Lincolnshire. It was triggered by the resignation of Conservative MP Stephen Phillips, who had a huge majority.
But the main challenger, UKIP, is hoping there'll be another political shock similar to that in Richmond last week. Our social affairs editor, Penny Marshall, heard the views of voters.
Nice. And he beats.
In this small market town in Middle England, they're clearing out the old and choosing their new face at Westminster. And as they do so, the Brexit courtroom drama's having an impact.
Sold for £5.
1 in 3 voted to leave in this Tory stronghold, and in the market cafe, some now want Brexit action.
What message do you think Westminster needs to hear from Sleaford on Thursday?
I think they need to know that people have made a decision and they should respect the people's decision. Keep taking it to court for what?
I don't think it should be anything to do with the law court. It's been passed by the people.
The Supreme Court case is seen by many here as an attempt to slow, if not thwart, the will of the people. And ahead of the by-election, it's Brexit that's dominating, if not straining, relations with Westminster.
They don't really like what we think, do they, very much?
UKIP's Nigel Farage was in Sleaford this afternoon trying to win support from the town's Brexiteers. After last week's shock by-election result in metropolitan Richmond down south, he hopes the political fault lines may be moving. But in the local gym, there was some support for the government's pursuit of Brexit through the courts.
I'm very concerned about the fact that the judges at the appeal court were vilified in the press afterwards, and the fact there's already been attempts to vilify the current judges going for the Supreme Court appeal.
Through our courts and through Parliament is how we've upheld the system of democracy that we have in this country. Without that, we compromise what we stand for.
A lot of the younger people are more worried, and the older people, I think from everyone's opinions, are more racist.
On the doorsteps, the canvas of talk may be Brexit, but behind the doors, the concerns remain everyday matters of everyday life. As the politicians wait to hear what the judges think, on Thursday, it will be the chance of the people to tell the politicians what they think. Penny Marshall, ITV News, Sleaford.
And here on your screen is the full list of candidates that in that Sleaford and North Hykeham by-election, and that vote is on Thursday.
Here, one of the most important constitutional court cases in legal history has begun in the Supreme Court. For the first time in history, all 11 judges are sitting together to decide whether the government must give Parliament a vote before starting the Brexit process. The highly charged nature of the case was emphasised when the President of the Court warned that threats of serious violence had been made against those who had brought the case against the government. Our political editor Gary Gibbon has this report.
Nigel Farage originally threatened 100,000 marchers would besiege the Supreme Court today. Instead, some pro-EU demonstrators turned up, shouting, "Nigel, where are you?" Nigel, where are you? The last judges to consider whether MPs should vote on Brexit were vilified by some pro-Brexit newspapers. The 11 judges of the Supreme Court know they too are under scrutiny, accused of being too close to Europe by the Daily Mail. Family members who've tweeted support for Remain, ties to European institutions, or in one case, owning a house in Italy. The President of the Court said he'd asked if anyone involved wanted any of the 11 judges to stand down from this case.
All parties to the appeal have stated that they have no objection to any of us sitting on this appeal. This appeal is concerned with legal issues, and as judges, our duty is to consider those issues impartially and to decide the case according to the law. That is what we will do.
The Attorney-General told the judges Parliament didn't need them to insist they vote on Brexit. It could sort itself out.
This is all about standing up for Parliament. I say Parliament can stand up for itself.
You are he voted Brexit. Yeah, this is my friend. My friend.
Outside, political rows spawned by the referendum were rerun. Inside, the government's lawyer found his arguments challenged by the judges. If going into Europe required MPs and ministers to act, didn't leaving need both?
Put very simply, one of the arguments that you will have to deal with is if our accession was the result of joint effort, should our departure not equally be so?
Well, my Lord, the submission I make is that the joint effort, as it were, in the 72 Act is a joint effort in the sense that it assumes that all the prerogative powers continue to exist and be operated.
The court is live streamed. Hundreds of thousands were expected to tune in, but this is not US blockbuster courtroom drama.
You have a set of files called CA.
On the electronic bundle.
On the electronic bundle, it's 1697.
It's 543.
I think you're saying it's bundle 3, tab 5. I think that's the...
No, it's volume 5.
It's volume 5.
The odds still seem pretty stacked against the government in this case, and they've got a super short bill just about ready to be fast-tracked through Parliament if they lose here when judgment comes in January. But Theresa May's been telling European leaders she still thinks she can keep to her timetable, delivering Article 50, Britain's notice to leave Europe, by the end of March, if not a few weeks earlier. Garrigan, Channel 4 News at the Supreme Court.
Well, I'm joined now from Sleaford in Lincolnshire, where a by-election is taking place later this week, by the former UKIP leader Nigel Farage, and from Westminster by the long-serving Conservative MP and former Cabinet Minister Ken Clarke. Ken Clarke, in a year in which we've seen Brexit and now this Italian vote, does it feel to you as though the EU is imploding?
No, because the Italians are amongst the most pro-EU populations in Europe. The Italian vote was about lots of other things. They were protesting about the euro, which they blame for their economic problems, but anyway, that's Italian politics, and I respect their decision. There is certainly a mood of angry protest throughout the Western world. I mean, Trump, Nigel Farage, who's with us, Beppe Grillo in Italy, and others, they're different country by country, but in common they have this angry, anti-political establishment. Life is very difficult, life is complicated, simple solutions that they're advocating. But we're rather Brexit obsessed in this country, which is very understandable, so we should be in the present situation we've created. There's a slight tendency to read across to other countries. Austria could be interpreted as a pro-EU vote, but it wasn't. There are other things in Austria, but there the populist right was defeated.
Nigel Farage, you keep warning that things are going to get even bumpier. What do you mean?
Well, what I mean is this. I mean, it's all well and good for Ken to talk in the terms that he does, but he's missing something. We're not just angry across the European Union, we're recognising the failure of this project, whether it's the Eurozone, whether it's the migrant crisis, whether it's youth unemployment, any measure you want, government from Brussels isn't working, and what is happened in Brexit, happened in Italy yesterday, and almost happened in Austria with a genuinely far-right candidate. What is happening is we're saying this: we want to live in nation-state democracies. We want to trade with each other, be friends with each other, but not be governed by the institutions of the European Union. And I promise you, what you've seen in 2016 is just a start. This will roll on until this European project in its current form is dead.
And you think it will be dead next year?
Well, I can't tell you, whether it's dead next year or whether it takes longer, I don't know. But we're watching the European project dying before our eyes, and I'm very pleased about it, because I didn't just want the United Kingdom out of the European Union, I want Europe out of the European Union. I want a different Europe where friends, nation states can trade and cooperate together, not have laws dictated to them and judged by foreign courts. And that feeling, it's not a right-wing feeling, it's not a left-wing feeling, it's a very popular feeling.
Europe is a union of nation states. It's never going to be. The federal thing is a complete mythology. It's no longer anybody pursuing that. It's a union of 28 nation states who would be much weaker politically if they were apart, much less able to deal with, say, the migrant crisis and other things, much more influential and able to look after our interests if we cooperate. And when we cooperate, we're more valuable to the Americans as a leading player in the European Union, and our economies thrive with the biggest free trade area in the world. The problem is, since the 2006, 2007, 2008 financial crisis, we've had genuine hardship, people left behind. The problems get difficult, but still, we're sovereign states in key things. The migrant crisis Nigel mentions. We've never given up control of our borders over non-EU citizens. Whether we take in Syrians, Afghans, Indians, Pakistanis, entirely a matter for a British government, our border controls, nothing to do with Brussels. Actually, we can tackle it if we work with allies in going both to the source, the control, stopping people getting to the mainland of Europe in the first place, deciding how we actually share the burden where there's genuine claims for asylum from warfare in which we're participating, all those things. The trouble is, the modern world is very, very complicated, and if you're a politician in government, you have difficult problems to which you can't give easy answers. But simplistic protests, be it a right or left, Syriza in Greece or Beppe Grillo in Italy, are escapism.
Or Nigel Farage
really.
here, I suppose.
And the reality is we're better off if we maximise our clout in the world by cooperating with our neighbours.
Nigel Farage, are you just throwing hand grenades from the sidelines before running off to America?
I mean, poor old Ken. I mean, he's a lovely bloke, but he's completely out of date. The idea that we are better off inside the European Union to operate with America. Ken, you may have missed this, but a guy called Donald J. Trump becomes the president on January the 20th. And thank goodness for that, because at last there's a man in the White House who is pro-Britain, who wants us to have a bilateral trade deal with America as quickly as possible and sees an independent United Kingdom as a genuine bridge to the rest of Europe and indeed to the rest of the NATO members. The world has moved on and there'll be more Beppe Grillos. Ken, this project isn't about cooperation. This project is about the assimilation of power in Brussels. Any country that has signed up to the Eurozone, and you, by the way, wanted to sign us up to it, and thank God we didn't listen to you. Any country that signs up to that has given away its ability to set its own
Let me briefly get Ken Clarke to respond to that, because we're just running out of time. Ken Clarke, isn't the truth that people are listening to Nigel Farage and not you?
But they're listening to him for the long reasons of AR. Yeah, Nigel had a triumph. That we wouldn't have had a referendum but for Nigel Farage. And it was Nigel Farage that won the argument. So Boris just helped to make it respectable and provided the photo opportunities. But let me just give a specific example. I mean, well, Trump is a protectionist. America hasn't signed a trade deal with anybody for 5 years. They'll sign a nice deal. Won't have much content without a lot of effort. The EU, the combined efforts of the EU, were trying to get us a deal. It's hard work. Nigel campaigning in the referendum posed in front of a picture of a lot of Syrians and Afghans trying to cross the border into Croatia. He did not explain that if any of these people wanted to come to Britain, it was the British government controlling its border would decide whether we admitted them or not.
We must leave it there.
It had nothing to do with Brussels. This is simplistic, rather very, I hate to use the word, it's become a cliche, populist avoiding of the real problems.
I'm afraid we must leave it there, gentlemen.
People who can tackle problems, not professional comedians like Beppe Grillo.
We'll bring you both back, I hope, very soon. But thank you both very much indeed. Ken Clarke and Nigel Farage.
Thank you.
Now,
I've been getting away with it all